Hi, my name is Dooley. I'm giving you a lecture on William Allen's Nazi Seizure of Power. Northiam is the town that he studies in his book, and it's basically a small town in northern Germany that has different class divisions, whether it's working class, middle class, upper class, and basically goes into this to look at the personal experiences of these people to be able to make better generalizations of the rest of Nazi Germany at the local level. And he says the importance of local Nazi groups as being the foundation for the national regime, of the Nazi regime, the national Nazi regime. And basically the only problems with this could be the generalizations of it, but then again, those are still important in drawing comparisons with other local towns. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is that what is National Socialism? Why are people so attracted to it? So National Socialism, in the eyes of the people of this town, was seen as youthful. So the people primarily that were publicly seen as Nazis were people from the ages of 18 to 25, very energetic, very enthusiastic. They were considered pro-religion, that they usually at their meetings they had Lutheran pastors come in order to have speeches on National Socialism to push this idea that Nazism is pro-religious. They were militaristic in the sense that they had the SA and the stormtroopers having military parades, drills, and other things like that, which was very common in this time in this town. They also built shooting galleries and stuff like that, shooting clubs, other clubs like the Warriors League that were militaristic. This town was also very nationalistic, and the Nazis pushed for a nationalistic sense. Basically, that for the Nazis, they considered German imperialism better than the Weimar Republic, and they wanted to go back to the good old days. And this is the same idea that you see in the middle class and other sections of the town and also surrounding area. The biggest factor in the Nazi attraction was anti-Marxist. It was primarily an anti-Marxist party in the beginning. It wasn't really anti-Semitic. You don't see anti-Semitism at all in the town. It's only pushed to certain groups of bigots and other people out more primarily in the country, in the county. It was seen as very radical, which would help it later on also, because a lot of other parties weren't considered radical. They were considered a party of revolution of change. So the main people that were attracted to National Socialism at the time were the biggest, the middle class. The middle class saw this as a tool to destroy social democracy, which they didn't really see as valuable. They wanted to go back to the same German imperialistic ages they had beforehand. They also were agitated by the SPD, which through such things as the SPD saying in the local newspaper that bankruptcies were occurring in the middle class and that they should be ashamed of and made fun of, and also that the lowering of prices by these middle class businessmen was seen as just a thing that should happen. It wasn't applauded or cheered by the SPD. So there was an obvious agitation class division between the Social Democrats and the middle class. You also see the farmers as a big group of people that vote for the Nazis early in the beginning, because they pushed, in the beginning, National Socialism pushed for farmers and working class people out in the rural country as their main voters, and a lot of it was anti-Semitic propaganda. Now we go on to the Nazi tactics in elections, which got them into power. We see perpetual campaigning. So basically, they would nonstop campaign, even when it wasn't election season, to keep in mind had people in mind of National Socialism and to be reminded of it at all times. But especially in election season, the week before, they would saturate it, where every single day there was a meeting, a parade, or some other event such as entertainment. They also had a self-correcting propaganda system in which they would invite speakers of different combinations and see how much profit they gained, how many people came, and other things like that to help get more votes. So they would self-correct that and find the right combinations for the right kind of people. So they'd have different speakers for different groups, whether it be the middle class, the working class, farmers, etc. And this basically showed that Nazism could be something that was for all different classes, all different ways of life in this town. You'll see violence is a big part of Nazi tactics and elections, where they seen as intimidating, and also the publicity of it showing that they were very radical and that they were going to do anything they could to have a revolution. You also see you also see the sincerity of like handwritten letters. They would send handwritten letters before the election, saying to vote for the NSDAP, and to show that sincerity, that like closeness with National Socialism. And they also had renting halls rented out the entire election season in order to keep other groups from being able to have mass meetings in these huge election halls. So the behavior of the parties towards the Nazis, and why Allen basically blames them for a lot of how the Nazis became in power, especially locally in Norheim, was that the SPD and rightist groups like the Nationalist and Center Party and DVP wouldn't legitimize each other's parties as political parties. They wouldn't, actually cooperate at all. And this led to this division that the Nazis basically sent a wedge into to have a coalition with the DVP and the nationalist groups in order to have a more powerful coalition, to have majority power in not only the Reichstag, but also in local elections, as you see in the book. So then we go on to the elections in Norheim. The Reichstag in 1930, you saw this basically tripling of votes by the Nazi Party. They had about 15 times the amount of votes they had in the 1928 election. In spring of 1932, in the presidential elections, you also see Nazis gaining a lot of votes from smaller groups, the splinter groups, like small parties in Germany, and that would account for a lot of the electoral gains that they get later on. And then in the summer of 1932, one of the last biggest elections, you see von Papen's become the Reich Chancellor, and basically this helps spur the Nazi regime, even though it has political stagnation at the time, is losing members, because von Papen is very against SPD and against any socialist or Marxism movements, and he starts taking SPD members out of political office, starts going hard on the Reichsbanner, which is the military group for the SPD. And then you start to see the Nazi regime take over. So there's a purge of all communists completely in 1934. That's when the Nazis have majority power in the Reichstag and other local authorities. So you see them take over in school boards and committees of school boards, the unions, and the railroad workers, which are all dominated by the SPD beforehand. And so the power of the Socialist Party is basically taken away by the Nazi regime. And you also see the Civic Association, which is a huge nationalist association in Norheim, was also taken over by the Nazi regime. And then you see the repression of newspapers in order for no more fair elections to be casted anymore after 1934. There was no really reaction to the Nazi takeover by anyone other than the idealist of the Nazi group. So you see this bifurcation. There's two different groups in the Nazi Party. There's one of idealists and one of thugs. And the thugs were the SA, Ernest Gehrman, other people like him that saw it as a means of not only to brutalize people, but also to gain money and fortune. Then you see the ones over here that are idealists, Willam Spanis, the local bookstore owner, and other people like him, for instance, the Vogue, who's a teacher in one of the schools, as respectable people. So you see one side is respectability and one side is thuggishness. And the problem is with that is that it attracts both groups. So it attracts people that want respectability, and also attracts groups that want to see the thuggishness, want to see the brutality of it. And that's why National Socialism, the party, can encompass all different groups of people. So then we go to the terror system that was created after the Nazi Germany regime came into power. This created an atmosphere of distrust and fear. So basically they would arrest people for minor offenses, such as uttering like words against the Führer or not saluting Heil Hitler and all that kind of things. And it showed the impression that there was more serious offenses would be severely dealt with later on. So it kept people from doing anything too serious. The justification of the system was that there's no political fights anymore, but that's mainly because there's no more political parties anymore. And then there was also the justification that was protecting people from socialist and Marxism uprisings, even though no such thing was possible at the time. The problem for Social Democrats did this at this time, and why they couldn't really react to this terror system or other things to stop the Nazi regime, was that they saw it as being one of radicalism. It would never have had a large backing. But when they had a large backing, obviously the assumption fell through, and we see the Nazi regime come into power. In this tariff system, political opponents are economically hurt. That was the first step in taking care of political opponents. They were forced out of their jobs, and then they'd forced them either out of the town or not have any job at all. They couldn't find a job unless they were part of the NSDAP. Then you see, for instance, such as Thomas Gollan, who was the deputy mayor, the chief administrator of the town behind Peters, was basically stripped of his job and wasn't able to find a job until he went to the army as a civilian worker where he was protected. Then we go to the atomization of society, in that now it's supposed to be this German unity. There's no party and state identities that are separate anymore, it's together. The party is the state. So you see the atomization of society through such things in the local levels as all the clubs, the economic clubs are lumped together into one big club. All the shooting clubs are lumped together in one big club. All the sports clubs are lumped together in one big club. And each one had an executive board that was controlled primarily by Nazis. In order to have Nazi oversight and also to have a distrust, and also to basically make it to where either you had the choice of isolation society or you had to have relationships via Nazi organization. The great justification for this was the revival of the economy. At this time, when the Nazi regime came into power, you started to see the revitalization of the economy in Nazi Germany. And basically, the Nazi regime uses this propaganda to justify the means of what they were doing in the tariff system and the atomization of society. The atomization of society also led to basically more and more justifications for the harsh treatment of Jews, because it kept them out of this German unity, this folk German people. We see life in the Third Reich as basically one that daily life didn't really change that much. I mean, there wasn't really much to change. Basically, there would be instead of one local group, they were split into smaller groups, blocks, and they had a block warden that would get collections from different people for either the Nazi regime in general, from the national group, to get more and more money to fund more propaganda and more military things for later in World War II, other things like that. But there wasn't really no significant changes that you saw on a daily life level in the Third Reich. So the conclusions you can see from this are that so this quote is important, I think. Each group saw one or the other side of Nazism, but none saw it in its full hideousness. And this basically goes back to the perception of Nazism, and that many people saw different sides of it, but they never saw the full thing in its full-fledged form. The middle class saw it as a tool to destroy social democracy. The working class saw it as something that wasn't going to be a big thing until it actually did, and they started taking it very seriously, but they couldn't stop it. The upper class saw it as something, just as a middle class thing. Like the perception of Nazism was different for each individual person and also for each group, which made it harder for people to identify Nazism as a thing that was going to lead to bad consequences. And that's the end of the lecture.